Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great to be back in Liverpool. I'm here with the director of GCHQ, Robert Hannigan, and on a personal note, I should say that it is extremely nice to be next to the man who I first met in Afghanistan in January 2010. And I can tell you on a personal note, if you've shared a flak jacket and a helmet with a future spy master, you know you've made it in journalism. Robert, you came to GCHQ in 2014, having served previously as counterterrorism advisor to the Prime Minister, and you came in, to coin a phrase, as an agent of change. Can you tell the audience how you set your first priorities as, if you like, the first director, the first post-Snowden director, and give us a brief account of the changes and that you've seen at the agency?
Well, thanks very much, Lionel, and good morning, everybody. I remember talking to you about this actually when I started back in 2014, and it felt like the flak jacket was more useful post-Snowden than in Afghanistan, actually. And there were some immediate things we had to do, which we talked about at the time, and that was to re-legislate, so a big piece of legislation put through. We now have the most transparent piece of legislation on interception in the world, bar none. People may not like bits of it, but it is absolutely transparent and involves judges in a new way. A huge step forward. But I think alongside that, there was a big education program to be done. Certainly GCHQ had been the most secret of the agencies. No one knew anything about it. And the one criticism we've had from the courts post-Snowden, the courts have never criticised the way we collect data, what we do with it, the way we gather intelligence. The one criticism, we didn't say enough about it. And they were right. So we have tried to put that right in recent years, including through the media. So that has been a big change. But I would park that because immediately on arrival, to answer your question, the big threats, which I was very familiar with, were staring us in the face. So the rise of ISIL, terrorism on the one hand, and cybersecurity, a rising tide of cyber incidents, which we could see rising over the next few years. So those were the things that immediately suggested themselves as dominant, and Snowden felt then and feels even more now with sort of ancient history, really.
And you also penned an important article in the Financial Times, pretty well straight up in your tenure, where you criticized some of the big tech companies in Silicon Valley for, in a way, aiding and abetting ISIL, or at least acting as command and control, because they were not cooperating sufficiently post-Snowden with the intelligence agencies. Did that article have any impact?
It certainly did. I got a lot of flack for that too, actually, and it generated a lot of debate, which is what I wanted. I wanted a debate about it. It was a real problem at the time and still is, and arguably the greatest impact of Snowden and of WikiLeaks and other things is to poison the relationship between governments and Silicon Valley. And that was a real problem at the time. It has calmed down, it has got better. But I think I was trying to touch on in the Financial Times a much bigger issue, which is the internet is new, these companies are relatively new, they are trying to cope with the problem of responsibility for content. They started their early years wanting to be neutral conduits of data, and I think they genuinely meant that. They have gradually realized that they are responsible for content, whether it's terrorism or child sexual exploitation or fake news. So this is evolving, and it is a debate that's still going on. I think it's very relevant to the mainstream media too, and it will continue to evolve. And it reflects the fact that the internet is a relatively new creation. It wasn't planned, and it's a gloriously chaotic and innovative thing. And society is still trying to cope with how we do that, including how we do the security of it.
We'll come back to fake news in the next panel, subject of great interest to certainly us at the FT. Let's move to 2016, a landmark year, the creation of the National Cybersecurity Centre. Tell us, why was this necessary, and how will you measure its success?
I've been involved in this for over 10 years now, and actually Gordon Brown asked for the first cybersecurity strategy, and there were one or two people in the room involved in it, and it was very much a scoping document. It was trying to get our heads around the problem back in 2007, and it was really, as Kieran said earlier, admiring the problem in a good way. And then at the beginning of the coalition government, we had a couple of ministers who were very passionate about this. William Hague, who was Foreign Secretary but made Minister for Cyber, and George Osborne, who absolutely got the economic side of this. And they sat down together and said, so what do we aspire to do for the UK? What's the ambition? And it was out of that meeting and in a letter, which I think I probably ended up drafting, that we got the ambition of make the UK the safest place to do business online. Rather than have lots of little ambitions in different bits of different silos, all of which were good, what could we say we aspired to for the UK? And then how do we get there? And a lot of money was put into this, and that meant both organizational change, so who was going to lead this, but also how are we going to approach actually doing something rather than talking about it. And out of that came the National Cybersecurity Centre in two ways. First of all, bringing coherence. Mark Carney was very vocal about the smorgasbord of cyber organizations inside and outside government, and who did he go to, and financial services didn't know who to go to. So we decided to rationalize. The minister sat down and said, yeah, we'll put it in one place. Now, where do we put it? Do we create some new civil service organization? And I think we in GCHQ then had to take the decision, are we prepared to step up and just do this? Having been an expert consultant for decades, I mean, we are the National Technical Authority, and CSG did a great job in specific areas. Are we prepared to step up and lead this for government? So we took a decision to do that.
Which meant obviously going public.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a big change, big cultural change. I mean, there was always a part of GCHQ that was semi-public, but this was
funny, I never heard about that bit.
Well, no, not many people have heard GCHQ at all, actually. So CSG always had a kind of quiet presence, but this meant going very public, yeah. And having a headquarters for the NCSC in London, in Victoria, in a very private sector, but public building, was a deliberate choice by George Osborne and others, because it had to feel that it was joint with industry. Because the key insight of the strategy was, as the Minister said earlier, we cannot do this as government. It is too big a problem, and the internet is not run by government, which is a good thing. It has to be industry. So a key part of it was opening up a bit. But at the heart of this, maybe come on to some of the active things we're doing.
Yeah, because I'd like to know how you measure success.
Well, I think that's a really good question. But I think putting experts in charge of the strategy or at the heart of the strategy was really important. So generalists are great, I'm one myself, but we absolutely need experts at the heart of this and driving it, coming up with solutions, not just ever better processes.
And you didn't have a few people in Cheltenham saying, wait a minute, you're taking our best people.
Well, some of our best people were always involved in this. And of course, taking it, I mean, I think the key thing is NCSC is an operational arm of GCHQ. It is part of us. The reason we're good at this is because we've been doing both sides of the coin for nearly 100 years now. So we've been doing the intelligence gathering, but we're doing the security. I often use Bletchley as a sort of paradigm for this, but people like Alan Turing in particular actually spent more of his career with us doing information security, secure telephony in his case, for the US and for us, than he did doing code breaking. And that's been true of our best people right the way through. And it is why we, unlike some other countries, are pretty good at it, because we do both sides and we understand both sides.
Because the snooping is what we might think is the sexy bit, whereas the protective bit is the boring bit.
Well, I wouldn't put it like that. I'm sure lots of people in the audience would see the protective bit as extremely sexy.
All those who think protective, there's a lot of hands out there. I can't actually see them,
but it is true. You get more headlines for Internet of Things devices that snoop rather than are protected. But
let's just talk a bit about threats, because last year, by all accounts, the latest threat assessment talks about 5 pivotal incidents, game changers in the phrase. Can you tell us a little bit about them? Why were they game changers?
I don't want to steal the sandwiches from the next session, but
just give us a little sort of raise the show a bit of ankle.
Yeah. One of the reasons we rushed to set, in government terms, really rushed to set up the NCSC is that we could see, and indeed our own Joint Intelligence Committee was predicting, a major incident within the next year or so, a state-level incident. And we could see anyway at a commercial level the rising tide of incidents, which people in this room will be very, very familiar with. Some of them made the press, some didn't. But if anything, we underestimated the early take-up. So in our first 3 months, I think we had 188 significant incidents to deal with. So the incident management bit of NCSC has been much busier than it expected to be in its first 3 months. And I think that gives you a sense of the scale. There's a lot of focus on state intrusions, and we've seen those in headlines, including into the financial sector from North Korea. But a lot of it, as we often discuss at these events over the years, is much more basic than that. It's fundamentally about crime, as Kieran has said, and it is a relatively low level in its delivery, but sophisticated in its ambition and its networking of the threat.
Let's go back to your time and what you've done as an agent of change at the agency. One of the things that you've championed is diversity in all aspects. Tell the audience a little bit more why this is so important today.
Well, diversity of thought is the key to innovation for us. I mean, if we're not innovative, if we're not looking at the threats in intelligence and cyber in 10 to 20 years, as well as the next year or two, we will go out of business and we won't be able to do the job for the country. So getting people to think differently, throwing together different types. So I'm quite passionate about it for that business reason. The cyber area, as everybody in this room knows, we are going to have a massive skills shortage in the UK and across the world by the middle of the next decade. We already have a shortage. And if we are not tapping into half the population, women, we are depriving ourselves of a massive talent pool. So that's why I have particularly emphasized women in technology. We need to bust some myths. We're running a competition for girls at the moment, aged 13 to 15. We've had, I think so far, over 8,000 girls taking part in that. We've had 2,100 schools, girls' schools, taking part in it. It is a myth that girls are not interested in this. If you look back at the history of computer science, back to Bletchley, but also to the 50s after Bletchley, when the UK was the leading world power on computer science, and alongside the US until really the early 60s. Women were at the heart of that. They really were.
So what happened?
Well, it's a really good question, and there's a very interesting new book by an American academic on this. And her contention is that a mixture of poor government policy advised by civil servants who didn't get technology, and a reversal.
Those generalists again.
Absolutely, and a reversal of gender, so that as computer science jobs became seen as important and well paid rather than clerical and menial, they flipped from being jobs for women to being jobs for men, and that is essentially what happened. Partly, of course, men returning from the war, so that made a difference, but there was a much more fundamental shift, and we have to put that right. And we can only put that right collectively. So every company, every institution, every organization needs to be working on this. It won't right itself. The education market is not going to do this very quickly unless we help it. So we are doing things, this competition is one example, but we're also very supportive of the Tech UK initiative to bring women back in, so returners, mid-career, back into the tech sector. A lot of our recruitment is, as with the tech sector, on aptitude rather than STEM qualifications. We get great people that way. Apprenticeships we're doing in a big way. People straight from school who definitely don't want to go to university. Some of our best people are coming in that route. So we all need to do everything to try and put right that skills problem. And I think we will also get a better, innovative and creative approach by fixing diversity. So there are a range of reasons.
Do you think, Robert, that did everybody get it, or did you get a little bit of resistance?
Quite a lot of resistance.
I'm doing British understatement, by the way.
I think there's a lot of resistance, often not deliberate or conscious, but people feel it's either too difficult or they feel slightly threatened by it. This isn't new in diversity. I think it's normal in every institution. We all feel slightly threatened by change, but it is absolutely critical to making progress.
Diversity also applies to racial, ethnic diversity, not just, and perhaps that's also important given the way demographics in the UK have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. You may have seen some of the stuff we've been doing on this. We are underrepresented on ethnic minorities in GCHQ, significantly more so than some other, even intelligence organisations. We've been pushing hard to change that. It's partly about changing the culture. It's partly about just letting people know what we do and getting into the right publications, the right communities, the right schools, Because there is a very vibrant sector out there. It means recruiting in different areas. We're recruiting very successfully in Manchester, for example, getting a much more diverse demographic. So there are things you can do. It takes time, but it is absolutely worth it, and the results are fantastic.
So 10 years, as to quote Teddy Roosevelt, man in the security arena. You've been right at it. You're stepping down now as GCHQ director. If you look back, one was the biggest challenge, and two, what are you most proud of achieving at GCHQ?
At GCHQ, I mean, I've...
Apart from working with Gordon Brown.
Yes.
But the biggest challenge, and then at GCHQ, look at this. He's come full circle.
Answering my question for me. Yeah, well, Northern Ireland was a big thing for me prior to that. I think the biggest challenge is getting people to understand cyber. And people in this room will instinctively understand it better than... But the baseline of understanding across society, across government, is still very low. And we need to change that, and it will take time. But some of the things... I think people will look back in another 10 years and say, why wasn't more done earlier by governments?
Right.
Just to sort of clear out a lot of the rubbish. And you've seen some of the active defence, we're calling it, measures, which are, in a sense, no-brainers. You know, why is it necessary for those 300 million fake spear phishing emails from HMRC, allegedly? Why do they get through? They don't need to get through. Yeah. And we've managed to clear out 300 million in the last few months. I think people in the future will say, why did that ever happen? Why was it allowed to happen? So getting a balance between what the individual can do, so crowdsourcing the security, if you like, and what government should do and what companies should do. Everybody needs to do security.
Yeah. And the thing you're most proud of, briefly, because I'm mindful of the clock.
I'm very proud of what we've done on counterterrorism in the last few years. Most of it is secret and difficult to talk about, but we have been very aggressively pursuing ISIL in particular, with fantastic results for the protection of the UK and results in taking on their media as well.
Robert Hannigan, Director of GCHQ, thank you so much.
Thanks, Darren. Good to see you. Thanks again. Take care.